Okay, hi everyone. This is Joe Massaro again with Yahweh Sisterhood Book Club, and we are in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And if you know a little bit about us, we meet monthly. And the great thing about our book club is that the readers get to meet authors, and that is who we are with today, friend and author Eva Marie Everson. We're so happy to have you with us.
I had to change my name real fast. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I see. Okay. Oh, I see. And I didn't mind.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know why I can't get Zoom just to change it, but it is so often because it's a double name. But it will go in, the Marie will go into that middle name.
Mhm.
So they just avoid that. And, I don't know why they do that, but I can't change it. So
Well, now you see, now that I know that you can change it the way you showed me earlier,
right. Yeah.
I'm going to try to figure that out.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to figure that out. And if I do, I'm going to let you know.
Okay. All right. It's pretty easy.
All right, everybody. We're here today to discuss a really wonderful book, and it's called The One True Love of Alice hyphen Anne. And I love that it's hyphen. By Eva Marie Everson. And maybe you could show us a copy of what the cover looks like, because it is just absolutely beautiful.
And I'll even tell you a funny story about,
yes.
Should I get a little closer?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And then we also have the large print edition, which is a little different. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story about the hyphen. My editor, when I was working on this, my editor, would email me and she would say, Alice Ann this, Alice Ann that. And she didn't put the hyphen in. And I finally said to her, Alice Ann has a hyphen in her name. I know. I have her birth certificate. So yeah, that was so funny.
Oh my gosh. I have so much I want to ask you, but maybe you could just share a little bit about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, in addition to being a writer, I write both fiction and nonfiction. And I tend to lean toward Southern fiction because, that is one thing I know pretty well is the people of the South and what makes her tick. And because the South is its own character, it is its own entity at times. So I do that. But I am also the president of Word Weavers International, which takes up the majority of my time. Word Weavers International is an international group of writers. We're over 1,000 members strong, predominantly Christian writers, obviously. And our goal is to help shape our work. We are iron sharpening iron, writers helping writers. And we do that through critique, but we also do that through education. We're very big about getting our writers to conferences and things like that. So that takes up a great deal of my time. Mm-hmm. I'm also a private writing coach and editor. And I actually own an editing, my company owns its own editing portion. So the company that I own has, me as a writer and then me and others who work as editors for the company. So that's in there as well. And then one more thing. I am the
that's not enough.
I know. I am the managing editor of Firefly Southern Fiction, which is a part of Iron Stream Media, also part of New Hope Publishing out of Birmingham, Alabama. So I do that as well.
Well, I'm excited because let me go to Word Weavers for a second, because this is how I've met you, because I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and a new chapter is coming out in Fort Wayne of Word Weavers. And so just mention how people can look at Word Weavers again. Where can they go?
Word-weavers.com.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And we're a chapter in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So if you're looking to join, please join us if you live around where we are. So now let's get back to your book, because I absolutely loved it. The cover, the covers are always so interesting to me because I just find them fascinating. I'll really study them, and then I'll go back after I finish the book and take a look at it again. So it really depicted so much of what the story was about. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the book. We obviously do not want to give away all that happens.
The details. All that happens. Well, I'll tell you that my inspiration was my husband and I years ago, where we lived in another part of, yeah, I live in an Orlando suburb. And if you know anything about Orlando suburbs, one just goes into the next, into the next, into the next. So I lived in a whole other town, but it was only 4 miles away. And we had elderly neighbors. We didn't know a whole lot about them. They didn't come outside very often, but we knew that they were elderly. And it was right around Christmas time. My husband and I were taking a walk one night, and they happened to be outside. And we said hello to them. They said hello to us. And her name was Alma. And Alma said, when you're done with your walk, if you want to come over for tea and cookies, we would love to have you. And I said, oh, that sounds nice. We may do that. And as we walked away, I said to my husband, we should really do that. I think they're lonely. Their children are grown, and they have grown grandchildren, and they're just home alone. And so when we came back from our walk, we stopped and we went in. And while Alma was putting together the tea and cookies, his name was Mac. Mac was showing us around, and I happened to see that he had a framed purple heart. And I said, oh, Mac, you're a Purple Heart recipient. And he said he was. And then he shared with me how he earned the Purple Heart in World War II. And it was such an interesting story that it would not leave me alone. It just kept coming back to me and coming back to me. And I knew I couldn't tell that particular story. Mm-hmm. But there was another story as well. And it was one from my own life of, we always, well, not always, but so many times in our lives, we look back on the choices that we make and we wonder if we made the right decision. Mm-hmm. I mean, it worked out fine, but what if we had gone the other way? And what if we had chosen another career path? Or what if we had chosen another beau? Those kinds of things. Would it have been better? Would this have happened or that have happened? We just start second guessing our own choices.
Sure.
And so somehow one day when I was working on some edits for the book that came out with Tyndale ahead of Alice Ann, which is called Five Brides, I was working on some final edits on that. And all of a sudden, this line, the one true love of Alice Ann, popped into my head. Mm. And it no sooner popped into my head and I wrote it down. And, I am notorious for, I just take notes all day long. Anything that comes into my head, I jot it down, because I'll forget it. And so I jotted it down and I looked back up and put my hands on the computer to get back into my editing. And the two stories came together. Wow. The story of me questioning some of my own choices and the story of Mac and Alma. And they blended together. And I realized I had a World War II story. And so, of course, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to finish this edit. So I finished the edit. And then I shot an email to the editor and I said, what do you think about this idea? And I fleshed it out a little bit for her. And she said, put that in a book proposal. We want to see it. So I did. And it was my second book with Tyndale Publishing. And of course, it required an enormous amount of research because I was not alive during World War II. And most of the adults who were alive in World War II, if they're still alive today, their memories are very vague. Or you know what I'm saying? It's not, I mean, if they had a sharp memory, then they would remember it explicitly. But I had a great aunt who said to me that she married my great uncle and then he went off to World War II and she didn't see him again for 4 years. And it was said in passing. Mm-hmm. But then years later, as I'm starting to develop this book, I'm thinking, wow, and I mean, she went into more detail. So I went back to her. She's now in a nursing home. No, actually right now she's passed away. But at the time I was writing this, she was in a retirement center. And I went to visit her and I said, Aunt Mary Beth, what can you tell me about what it was like to be a bride whose husband, you barely say I do. And then he goes off to war and he doesn't come back for years. And I had my pad and my pen. I was ready to go. And she just looked at me and said, it was hard. That was it. Yeah. And so, oh. And I said, well, do you remember anything specifically? no, just that it was hard. I thought, okay, I waited too long. But then I discovered that if I went to those who are, our older citizens, our golden citizens today, they were teenagers and younger children, but they were greatly affected by World War II. Everyone was affected by World War II. You would have to be an infant in the crib not to be affected by World War II. America stepped up to the plate. Americans stepped up to the plate. You were part of the war effort, whether you were in the European theater, the Pacific theater, or as I call it, the American theater.
Yeah.
You were part of the war effort. And it was just a different era. So then I started interviewing those people who had been, tweens and teenagers during that time period. And wow. And of course, I went to the library. I got books that were filled with letters that had been written back and forth during the war. And then also, those books where people just told their stories. And I was able to just incorporate all of that into the story of a 16-year-old girl whose, her one true love has gone off to fight in the war. And of course, she is pining away for him back in the States. But in the meantime, she is a part of that American theater. She is a part of the war effort. And all that's going on around her in this small southern town, the citizens that were lost in the war, and the women having to go to work, and the women having to learn to work in the fields, the POWs working alongside the field hands and the field owners, the farm owners, so that we could have our crops, the women giving up nylons, the kids giving up chocolate, the blackout shades along the coast, not being able to drive but 35 miles an hour. I mean, these things just went on and on and on. But I wanted to blend that into what it was like to be a citizen of the United States during those incredible 4 years of our history.
You blended it in, as you say, so beautifully, because some of the questions I was going to ask you, you've just answered them all.
Good. Okay. Nice to know you.
I love, the research that you did, and that was like one of my biggest questions. Is obviously there was so much research that went into developing this story, and it reminded me. I remember my parents, and my grandparents talking about the war. I had two uncles that were in the war, and I think that if I recall correctly, and I don't think anybody has written anything about this yet, so I'm going to pursue this, but I think they were POWs as well.
Oh, yeah.
So there's so much that happened during this time frame, and you're right. I mean, people had to step up and just take over, all the things that
Yes.
that you took for granted, because the men were gone.
Yeah.
And some of the
They were
women were
gone.
gone
Yeah.
as well, but the men were gone.
Yeah. Mostly the men, and then those who were left behind were the farmers. They needed them so desperately. And so they would say to them, you need to stay here. And some of the most amazing stories that I read were those, kids that grew up on the farm, and they wanted to go to war so bad that that they managed to slip away and get in. And one of the most amazing stories that I read was, it was a young man from Alabama. He was 16 years old. As soon as the war effort started, he figured out a way to fake his ID so that he could be 18 years old and get in. They found out he was a farmer's kid. They said to him, no, you need to go back. You need to work the farm. And he said, working the farm is too hard. I want to go to war. So somehow he got in, and he went to the Pacific Theater, and he was part of the Bataan March, Death March. And he, in his story, he survived the march, and he made it to the camp. And in the camp, the way they were so horribly treated. And he said, if I had known that it was going to be like this, I would have stayed on the farm. He said, I thought working the farm was hard. Being a prisoner of war of the Japanese was way harder than working the farm. And he told it with such humor, but you knew that, oh my gosh, these boys, they couldn't wait to go fight. I mean, they really thought they were going to go, we're going to go out there and we're going to whoop some Nazi butt and some Japanese butt. And, because this was kind of a double war,
Yes.
it was not just a one thing war. And they were going to go do that. And then they were going to be home in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not at all what happened. And so, like right now we're going through this pandemic, and there are times when I think, are we ever going to get through this? Is this ever going to be over? And then I realized we've only been doing this for weeks and months.
Right.
They did this for weeks, months, and years,
Yeah.
not knowing what the outcome was going to be or when it was ever going to be over. And so, it teaches us a lot about what human stamina is all about, and that we can endure. We have an amazing amount of endurance. And even when it feels like everything that we've ever known and loved is lost, and it's never coming back.
Yeah, I so agree with you. I know that in the course of, COVID-19, that, there have just been things in my own life that, God has revealed. And, you begin to realize, you're strong. You know what? We are a strong people. We are a strong nation. We have overcome so much. So I know that we will get through this as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My question was, when I wrote this book and I was realizing how much young people sacrificed, my question was, if our young people today were called to sacrifice, could they? And it's been interesting. There was a meme that I saw, and then a good friend of mine and I actually were talking about this meme the other day, and it said, in 1941, the young people of America were called to war. You've been called to sit on the sofa. I think you can handle it. And I mean, but here's the problem. We have become so lackadaisical and so blessed, and so used to our toys. And of course, one of the questions I had was, if young people today were called to give up their cell phones because there might be some type of interference, would they? Could they? And I'm not sure, Joe, to be honest with you, because I've seen the pouting over having to give up graduations and proms, and these are just parties, and they're important. Don't get me wrong. I know
I get it.
I got to walk with my little cap and gown on, and I got to, dance the night away. I got to do all of that and have the, baccalaureate services and all of that. We got to do all of that. So, I think every generation is called to give up something. And I'm so sorry that they're having to give that up. And I think that there are some things about all of this that are completely unfair. But then I also look at how inventive we've become. Little drive-by graduation parties, and we're doing things, and then we're postponing things. And I know, okay, well, maybe it won't be the same if you have your prom a year from now, especially now that you're already off at college and you don't care. But in the end, it's all about sacrifice, and it's about becoming a better people. Tom Brokaw wrote a series of books in which he called that generation the greatest generation. And I think that when you do your research, or if you read a book like The One True Love of Alice Sand, you see why they were called the greatest generation. They pushed themselves beyond the limit of what they thought they could do, and they did it. It's just it was a wonderful research for me, because it gave me an idea that we've romanticized World War II, but it wasn't all romance.
No. It definitely was not. One
No.
of the things that this generation probably has no idea, and you had mentioned it already, was about the POWs
Yeah.
in this country. Maybe you could tell a little bit about that.
You know what's amazing about that is I read lots of letters. Now we had German and Italian POWs, and let me say that I think I know the government will say that we displaced the Japanese to protect them. I think what we did was wrong.
Yep,
Maybe somebody had an idea that it could be the right thing to do. It was the wrong thing to do.
I agree.
But we're not a perfect country by
Right.
any stretch of the word. So both Japanese American citizens and then we had our POWs. I know Italian and German POWs. Instead of them just sitting in an enclosed area all day long, they put them to work in the fields. What was interesting was the letters that I found in the archives from German and Italian POWs who went back home and wrote the landowners letters after they got back home and said, if there's any way I can get back to America, I will look you up. I was treated better as your prisoner than I am in my army, or whatever branch of service that they were in, and that they were treated very poorly once they got back because they were caught. And I thought that was very interesting. Our POWs were treated a completely different way. And in fact, there's a line in the book that basically says to Alice Ann that if her friend went down in the Pacific, and that's what everyone thinks, that this man went down in the Pacific, you better hope he died.
Yeah.
Because being a prisoner of war in Asia was a horrific thing for these men. I mean, just unspeakable things were happening to these men. And so the fact that they returned, those who did return, and they went on to build America to the height of its glory. I mean, the 50s were our best years, right? So as far as industry
Yep.
and what we accomplished in the 50s was amazing. That decade was tremendous. But a lot of it was we came back from war and we're like, okay, we're going to build a strong country now. And we did. We had gone through, the great, the stock market crash. I think that was 29. We went through the Great Depression. We had gone through World War I. Now we're at World War II. So, I mean, World War I and World War II were the bookends of the crash and the Great Depression. And let's throw in the Dust Bowl while we're there.
Oh, yeah.
So now we've come back from war, and there was this determination by a group of Americans who had been just about beaten to a bloody pulp to turn this country into the greatest country in the world. And they did it. They did it.
Yeah.
In spite of what had happened to them, they did it. That's what I think we can draw from in stories like Alice Ann and just remembering where what these people brought us through and to. It's amazing.
Yeah, you just mentioned the Dust Bowl, and I saw a really incredible documentary on it by Ken Burns on
Oh,
PBS.
yes, I did too.
Yes, it's such a powerful story of, I mean, people are so resilient and
Yes.
work so hard. I mean, if you look at, just what they went through in the Dust Bowl alone, and to come through it, and then to look at this second war again, and to see what we have done as a great nation. I always say this: I am so proud to be an American,
Yeah.
and to be able to have my flag in front of my home, and recognizing that my grandparents came from Italy. And through Ellis Island, and they lived in upstate New York, and then finally moved down into the Bronx where I was born. And stories after story after story of what people have come through.
Yes.
And what they faced. I mean, I can't even imagine living in a different place and trying to get here and to build a life. and all that happened during the war. You know, I love history, so
Yeah, I do too.
yeah.
I do too. And when you do that research on your family, you know, my immediate family goes back farther than that, not quite to the Mayflower, but my husband's family. My husband was second generation born in this country, like you.
Yep.
So you know, it's a little different. Him being from Poland, his family being from Poland, and so you know his family tree is pretty tight. You know, it's like this is where we came from. Where mine is all over the place, but we were predominantly Scott Irish, and in doing my history and learning that as the Scott Irish moved down south, they were moving toward the Appalachian Mountains because that was so much like the Highlands, you know, and that was something that they were used to. But then coming on down, because we ended up, you know, we came through the mountains. My immediate family came through the mountains and then came on and settled in Georgia. But the Scott Irish were treated horribly.
Yeah.
You know, they were um, just they were just looked down on and spat upon, and it was like, okay, you know, anybody can shop in this store unless you're a Scott Irish. You know, I mean, you know, there's always been that where sometimes we're not sure about that something new,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's that resiliency.
Yes.
And then slowly there is a change made. And, you know, I think we're going to even see that now. I mean, between what we've gone through with COVID-19 and what's happened since the death of George Floyd,
Yep.
In spite of how crazy it has gotten, we will come out on top. We will be better as a country when it's over. And it's because there is something that's in our DNA, all of us as Americans,
It's
to
true.
rise up and do better and to be better and to get better. And you know, not everybody is going to feel that way. I mean, there's probably, you know, still people that if I said I'm, you know, Scott Irish, they would go, oh, pooey pooey, you know. And let me tell you, you know, I get some kickback sometimes if I'm speaking up north and they hear this accent and they're like, you know, oh, you're from the South, you know, and there's this immediate thought that I must be a slave owner or something. I'm like, no, that was a long time ago. And if I had lived then, I probably would have been one of those people saying, free them. I'm going up, you know, I'm going to help Harriet Tubman with the Underground Railroad. That would have been me. I know how I am about these things. So, but to understand that so much of who we are has been bred into us and pushed into us. And this is the way my mother thought, and her mother's mother, and father's father, and all that, you know. But at some point, there's always this interesting shift, and there's a change. So when you look back over it, it's not. And I mean, the Italians, gracious, you know, the Italians were really looked down on.
Oh,
And
I
don't
got
we
a story
love your pizza? Yeah.
I have a story about our name.
Yeah.
I'll share that. When my grandmother and them came over, it's Vasile, Vasile. And
Mhm.
of course, at those days, you know, they were called everything imaginable.
Yeah.
And so they eventually, because of that, Americanized it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how this change happened to what it was, but it became Wassil, Wassil. I have
Yeah.
no idea. But
Well, it's a good Christmas drink.
it's, so
Oh, goodness.
okay, so let me just tell you this real quick. You're talking about change and what happens and good things that can happen out of this. You know, God has been speaking to me for a while about getting back to being healthier, because I used to do triathlons many years
Ooh,
ago.
wow.
And,
Good for you.
but because of injuries over the last 10 years and lots of
Mhm.
surgeries, so I met and interviewed Janet McHenry. I don't know if you know her. She's
I
an
do know Janet.
okay. I
Yes.
love her. Her book
Yes.
Prayer Walking, and so
Yes. I've
11
done prayer
days.
walks with her.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay. So 11 days ago, I took up the challenge to do the 30-day challenge for prayer walking. So it has really transformed my life. I'm on my Facebook page live every day, just talking a little bit about it. And so out of everything that's happened, you know, God is really impressed for me to be praying for my neighbors. We live in a new neighborhood,
Uh-huh.
and all the things that has happened to me while I've been prayer walking and what God has done is just absolutely, you know, only God could do it. So so anyway, so you know, we are resilient. And you know what? And I, you know, and just believing that God will get us through this, and
Yeah,
He will. And
he
I'm so
will.
excited
He
about,
will. I mean,
yeah,
it really does feel like the world's coming to an end. But like I said, when
if
you
you
do,
watch the news, definitely.
yeah, and I try not to at
Yep.
times.
Mhm.
But if you go back and do your historical research, you discover that there is nothing new under the sun, as Solomon said. But we've gone through things like this many times over.
Sure.
I'm not sure of your age, but you and I probably remember the 60s very well. Talk about a turbulent time.
Okay, so I was just going to say to you earlier, and I forgot about it, but in October, I will be turning 70.
Wow, you look great.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So you and my husband were born the same year, 1950. So of
Yes.
course you remember the late 60s very well, but so do I. And I'm a little bit younger. I'm in my 60s, but I remember them. I remember it so well because I remember so many of the injustices. But also because I was a part of the desegregation of the South,
Hmm.
and there's there's a part of me that says that was such pride. You know, it was a rough time. It was a tough time. There's still a lot of pride in saying, "Hey, I was a part of that." And by golly, don't undo what we worked really hard for, you know, because
Yeah.
we had to go through the fire. There was so much that we had to learn about each other, and we did. And I think we became better because of it. I really truly do.
You know, it's interesting. I remember, you know, I saw the Beatles live at Shea Stadium, by the way. I need to say that.
No,
Yes,
no.
I did. My dad drove us down, and my sister passed out in the middle of the concert and had to be carried out. So let me just say that about the 60s.
Yeah.
But I remember I met Bobby Kennedy, and I met Dr. King, and
Wow.
totally transformed my life. And I believe so much of what, you know, Dr. King had said, you know, about being peaceful
Yeah.
and no rioting, you know, none of those things that, you know, we are seeing today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole different ball game, and I think it's propaganda.
Yeah,
But the right to peacefully protest is ours, and when
absolutely.
it's done right, the results are amazing.
They are amazing.
Died, but look what he started. And
Right.
I know every time I hear Dion's song, Abraham, Martin, and John, I
Yeah,
just start to
I
cry.
know. I
Because
know.
I think, I
I,
mean,
I've got the chills right now just thinking
right,
about that.
I
Yes.
don't remember the Abraham part, but I definitely
I
remember
remember
the Martin,
Mark.
John, and
Yeah,
Bobby part.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
That's a
so
great
let me
song.
just say this. I mean, you saw the Beatles in concert. I saw the Monkees.
Okay, so I saw the monkeys too. Okay.
Okay. All right.
I was one of those, my sister and I were one of those people that just loved music. I still love music
Yeah,
today.
I do too. Yeah.
So, yeah, my sister was definitely the groupie, and
Yeah.
she dragged me along. So I loved it.
Oh, that's
Okay.
awesome.
So,
And you know, during the writing of Alice Ann, I listened to the big band music, and I stuck with what was going on. And in
mhm.
fact, I've got it playing in the background right now. It's in my bedroom playing. I fell in love with that music. My husband gets so mad at me because I walk into our bedroom and I say, "Okay, Google, play Frank Sinatra," and he goes, "Oh,
Okay, so that music, that brings up a really good point. I
yeah,
just love the references to the music because I can't tell you how much big band music we have in this
yes,
house, and just absolutely love it. And even how people talk to each other was yes, ma'am.
yes."
You know,
And they
those,
still do where I come from.
oh
Yes,
yeah, well, yeah,
yes,
not here. Okay.
yeah.
At least I haven't seen it. Okay, so what would you tell somebody who, I know we talked a little bit about word weavers, but what would you tell somebody who says, I have a story, or I really believe that I want to write something.
Yeah.
what would you say?
I say to people all the time, because of course one of the things I get is, I have a story, you should tell it, and I'm like, no, I have enough stories of my own. Thank you. It'll take me another lifetime to get all these stories down. My suggestion is that you tell the story, especially when it's burning in your heart. Even if you think you're not a storyteller, there is a method to the madness. And while talent cannot be taught, talent can be honed. And there really is a method. There are formulas that even storytellers look at. We know if we have a 100,000 word, or like Alice Anna's 120,000 word book, that certain things have to happen by this chapter or by this word count and things like that. So these are the things that we learn at conferences. When I first started writing, I had been writing my whole life. I mean, I've been writing my little stories and composition books forever and ever. And thinking, no one would ever read what I wrote. It was just something I did for me. But I went on a walk one day, and I had this idea for a story. And I came home. I walked 4 miles that day. I came home. I sat down at my computer, and I immediately started writing, which is what I always would do. And then, of course, what happens is you hit about chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, and all of a sudden you've hit a wall. And it's because you don't know what to do. You don't know that there is a method to the madness. And for the first time ever, this was before Word Weavers, but for the first time ever, I said, I think I'm going to go get a book and learn how to do this. And I went to the library, and I got Writing the Blockbuster Novel by Albert Zuckerman. It is a huge book, but I took copious notes. I ended up getting it on tape. I would listen to it as I was going back and forth in my car to work home, and just study the craft of writing. And there is a study that you can do there. It is a craft. So like you may say, well, I'm pretty good at needlework, for example. But I don't know how to knit. Guess what? There are people out there who can teach you how to do that, so that's kind of what it's all about. If you've got a story inside of you, learn how to tell it and tell it. Sometimes it's just a matter of, like, if I was going to tell you the story of the day my grandparents married, I would just tell you about the day my grandparents married. Okay, now write it down. Now fill in the blanks. Now what happened before? How did they meet? What were the elements of the day? What happened after the marriage? So that's your nucleus. That's the organic element that you start with, and then you build on it. And not everybody has that talent, again, but if you have the talent, it can be honed.
Okay, I love that. So what are you reading right now, if you're reading something, and do you have some favorite authors that you recommend?
Well,
I'm sure there's a lot of them, so.
I just finished, now this is an ABA title. I just finished a novel by Eve Chase, who they say is the today's version of Daphne du Maurier.
Really?
You ever read Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel? Gosh, I can't remember, is it Hamburger Hill, I think it is, or something Hill, I don't remember. But oh my gracious, she's such a gothic, wonderful writer. So I don't know how I came across this book, but I started reading it and couldn't put it down. Just finished it. That's an ABA title. She now has a new fan. Eve Chase is her name.
Eve Chase. I'm putting that down. Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. And I'll have to say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it hits about an 8 in cleanliness. There might be a couple of words in there, but it's not something I don't hear if I'm watching network TV at night, which I don't do that very often. But then on the CBA side, so I picked up a book by my friend Lynn Austin.
Oh, Lynn, yeah.
Oh yes, she's amazing. And this book is Legacy of Mercy. And I'm telling you, I pick up a Lynn Austin book and I know I'm going to be hooked. In fact, as soon as we're done, I'm going to take my little lunch break and I can't wait to go sit in there and read some more. And I do this, I'm just going to go get in a bubble bath and I'm going to read 1 chapter and 1 becomes 2 and 2 becomes 4. And then I'm finally a prune and I have to get out. That's a favorite. in my favorite ABA authors for fiction, I love Eve Chase now, and Anita Shreve. I think she's amazing, although she's a little risque at times, but just gracious. Tracy Chevalier, Richard Paul Evans. Oh my gracious, I love Paul Evans.
I met him a couple of years ago. He's wonderful.
Oh, he is so.
I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't. But I have a poster behind this.
Oh, do you?
Yes, that he signed when I met him.
Oh, well, I'm coming to see you one day soon.
Okay.
And if it's missing, I didn't take it. So, yeah, I have a collection of his books. I've been collecting his books for years, and as a managing editor for Firefly Southern Fiction, I was at a conference recently, and a man named Andy Clapp sat across from me, and he handed me his manuscript. And as soon as I started reading it, I said, "Oh, shades of Richard Paul Evans." And we have contracted him. I'm editing that work now.
Wow.
I'm so excited about it. And when it comes out, I'll have to let you know. But he has that Richard Paul Evans voice. You know, it's so good. I don't even know if he knows who Richard Paul Evans is, but he's got that voice. For nonfiction, oh, and there's another one, Robert Gulrich. I love his work as well. But there's, as far as nonfiction in ABA, anything Rick Bragg writes, I will read it. He is a great Southern writer. I love his work, and I like Pat Conroy, but Rick Bragg has he's won my affections. Claire Fullerton is one of my authors that we publish at Firefly. She is an amazing author, incredible, and so is Renee Winchester. It's Renea Winchester. They are two authors. I'm telling everybody, you watch these two because they're going places. Now on the CBA side, anything Lynn Austin writes, I'll read. I think she's absolutely amazing. I mentioned her before. On the nonfiction side, Robert Benson. If Robert Benson writes a grocery list, I want to read it. I have been extremely blessed that Robert is my friend. Wow. And, you know, I got to know him just very casually, picked up one of his books, and then ended up at one of his conferences, you know, like a little, it's like a very small gathering of people. He does these very intensive gatherings, and ended up with a collection of his books as well. I'll read anything he writes, but then he became my friend. And so for that, I'm so extremely grateful. I'm trying to think other writers that I just love so much. You know, she's been a friend of mine for a long time. Ramona Richards is a mystery writer, and I don't typically read those kinds of mysteries. Like Lynette Eason, you know, she's also a wonderful writer as well. Jerry Jenkins, of course, an excellent writer. I'm not really big into end times, but I love some of his other work. And he asked me to be an influencer about a year or so ago, and I was so honored. I didn't know what to do. I was pretty thrilled. But Ramona Richards writes that, you know, that kind of murder mystery, cops are involved and that kind of thing. And that's not typically my speed, but I read one of her books and now I'm hooked on her writing. So she's also wonderful. Her book, Murder in the Family, is excellent. And then she's got another one coming out very soon called, oh gosh, it's something about Daisy Doe. I want to say it's Discovering Daisy or Burying Daisy Doe or something. I think it's Burying Daisy. Anyway, it sounds very ominous, doesn't it? But she's wonderful as well. So, you know, there's, I read so much.
I'm loving what you're saying. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, you're the only author that I have ever asked this question to that gave me so much.
So many writers.
I love it.
I got here. Oh my gracious. Julie Cantrell. Have you ever read any of Julie Cantrell's work? Oh my God. Start with Into the Free.
Okay.
And just once you sit down, open it up. I hope you have like a bag of chips or something next to you because you're not going to move. She is absolutely amazing. I just looked over and I see one of her latest books sitting next to me. Wonderful, wonderful writer.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, if you come into my home, you'll see, there are books everywhere, and
Yeah,
I collect the classics.
Books.
Yeah, just a few I see back there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've got 5 bookcases in this room.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wish I had a room that just big and long.
I do too.
Had bookcases everywhere. I wish I did. I've had to give away so many books.
I just hauled a whole bunch to Goodwill once because with COVID, it's like, okay, I need to clean all of this out. This is ridiculous. And so I hauled many boxes of books to Goodwill. And I'm just sitting here trying to think. I don't want to forget anybody. Anne Gabhart is another wonderful, wonderful writer. I love her. Denise Hunter,
Yep.
Beth Vogt. She's awesome as well. James Scott Bell, he's very good. We'll give him that.
So my second point of all of this is I'm going to connect with you to see who I can maybe possibly get to do some interviews with.
Oh, I can definitely get those interviews for you.
Okay, because I would love that. Okay.
They would love it too.
My last question would be, where do you like to read? In what places do you like to read, and what do you like to drink?
What do I like to drink?
While you're reading.
Oh, while I'm reading.
Not what do you like to drink? Drink.
Is that what you said? What do I like to drink?
When you're reading, I forgot to get the last part in.
Okay, say it again because I was like.
So it was supposed to be like this. Where are some of your favorite places to read, and what do you like to drink while you're reading? Like a cup of tea or something, like, whatever it is you like.
Okay.
To
Yes. Okay.
I'm not looking for a list of what you like to drink.
Okay. I'm a hot tea drinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I do drink coffee occasionally. I used to be a coffeeholic. And then my little tummy kind of turned on me. And so I started drinking hot tea because that was easier. And then I fell in love with it. And last year I went to Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and I really fell in love with it. So I love Lady Grey and I love Irish breakfast. Those two are my favorites. So that's what I like to drink. I love to read in that bubble bath that I talked about, but I also will just stretch out on the sofa and read. If my husband is dominating the family room he likes zombie movies. Can you tell how I feel about zombie movies? I will say to him, if you'll just put your earbuds in or whatever. But we have one of those sleep number beds that sits up, so I can sit up and read.
I have the same thing. Love it.
I'll hide out in the living room, sometimes in my office, but I just need to get out of here periodically. If I'm on a plane, I'm reading. If I'm not reading, I'm asleep. So I just, I love to read. Mm. The thing about it is my grandson came over the other day. He got a Kindle as a gift, a Kindle. And he was sitting up. I got so tickled because these 7 and they sit so straight, the little shoulders were back, and he had his Kindle and he was reading. And I said, this makes Mimi so happy to see you love to read. And the fact that he was laughing out loud at some of the things that he was reading, and you could tell he was really into it. The thing about reading, and when someone says to me, I don't like to read, I'm like, oh, it takes you away to where you want to go. If you find a good writer, that writer will take you away, and for a moment you become a character, and you can be anybody you want to be. You get this sense of being somewhere else and being somebody else. And so maybe if life is not being real good to you right now, you have this opportunity to slip somewhere else. And the other thing about reading, if it's done right, and even ABA novels, there's always that moral compass that's in there. Somewhere there's that moral compass that's in there. It's that we learn how to handle life through whatever it is that they've gone through, you know? So I don't know if it's safe to bring this up or not, but even stories like Gone with the Wind teach you so much about human stamina. And, you know, Scarlett is probably one of our least favorite characters in the whole world. She's that character you love to hate.
Yep.
But the truth of the matter is Scarlett learns so much about herself in the course of all of this. And, you know, if you really know the story, it does not glorify slavery. She learns so much about the character
She did.
Of the people that at one time her father owned, who then find their freedom. And even that loyalty that she feels toward them and they feel toward her. There's so much growth in Scarlett that I think we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater here. And, you know, I'm going to tout the praises of Margaret Mitchell's great classic as long as I possibly can.
Well, let me just, when you brought that up, I had to go get a book.
Yes, I see that.
This is actually a first edition. My second edition is coming out, hopefully by August. But this is the Book Lover's Companion.
Oh, yes.
And basically it is, you're reading, this is what I have in the back. Your reading life is important to you. Preserve your impressions, record your journey, track your path through the library of your life. So it gives you the ability to list all different kinds of things in here. Record books you want to read, book club reading list, track books you've borrowed, loaned.
Yeah.
But that's not the reason I brought it up. I brought it up because in the beginning, I say, in part, this is part, a paragraph, on our Christmas break, this was in 8th grade, we were assigned to read Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I remember Christmas morning after all the presents were opened and we filled our bellies with delights, I snuggled in bed and began reading. I was transported into the history of the Civil War era and was drawn into the vivid characters and the spark-flying dialogue between Scarlett and Rhett. This began my love of history.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I read it during summer break and about that same age. And, you know, even though I had heard the tales my whole life, you know, because of being born and reared in the South, I remember sensing a whole different sense of, you know, and wanting to know more about the history and what happened, and kind of taking on that attitude of, you know, those who, you know, bury history are doomed to repeat it. And hoping that we never do. No, definitely hoping that we never do. But I think we learned so much from that book, and it's not all bad. It's mostly good. So, yeah.
I agree. And my other book that I started to get me into the road of reading was The Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So those were my 2 8th grade books that started my journey.
Woo! That's big.
That is very big. Okay. Tell people where they can connect with you.
Eva
about your book.
Everson. Yeah, it's Eva Marie Everson author.com. If you go to evamarieeverson.com, that is a name squatter. I'm going to have my name trademarked because someone has decided there is no other Eva Marie Everson. I've done my research. It's just somebody squatting on my name. And I think she finally gave up. She only posted a few blogs, but that's not me. I don't juice, and I did not buy new bedroom furniture. So that's what she wrote about. It's evamarieeversonauthor.com. And that's how you can connect with me.
That's wonderful.
And of course, you know, Amazon, Facebook, all those places. I do devotionals at Facebook. They're live, and then they're of course recorded, but almost everything I post at Facebook is just open to the public. Not ashamed of anything. It's usually cute little cat blogs or memes, about being a writer or, that kind of thing. So about being a believer.
Yes. I think I just saw you talking about David.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes. What I've been doing is every weekday, except today, because today was my Word Weavers group. Every weekday, I look at another psalm, and those first few psalms are all Davidic. I also, I have a degree in biblical studies and theology, and so I use that. I've been teaching Old Testament theology for years. But so I just take one little line from the Psalms, and this is a line we can just focus on for today. That's a praise. It's a praiseworthy. But in order to understand that particular psalm, you really needed to understand the history behind it, and it was part of the Davidic story. So,
Okay, that's awesome.
you.
And again, I'm Joe Massaro with Yahweh Sisterhood Book Club. I did start out many years ago in New York, and now I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but we have something new that's starting. It is August 4th, if I have the date right.
That's right.
I
think.
It is Yahweh Sisterhood Book Club Across the Miles. And what we're doing is we will be live on Facebook, and you will see myself and another woman who will be the co-host, and we will be discussing a book together. So our very first book, you might be interested in this, is Becoming Mrs. Lewis.
Oh, I read it. It's excellent.
Yes. Oh, I knew you would have. See, by Patty Cowan.
Yeah. Let me grab something really quick while you
Okay.
get that. This is me and the author.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
That's so great.
She surprised me. She came up to me and said hello, and I knew who she was, of course. And I said, I'm Eva Marie Everson. She said, I know who you are. And I went, what? My good friend Rachel Houck, who I love her writing too. Rachel Houck, was sitting there and she just howled laughing. She said, oh my gosh, the look on your face is so funny. So apparently she knew. So anyway, in the South today, we had
got a picture to prove it.
Yeah. So yeah, and I know the rest of the world says you had your picture taken, but in the South we had our picture made.
Oh my gosh. I cannot begin to thank you enough. I have had so much fun.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
And, we hope that you will come back and discuss another book with us.
I'll be happy to.
There you go. Show it again.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Won the Illumination Gold. Yay.
I was going to ask you that when you first showed it. I couldn't tell what it said, so that's what it was.
Yeah. It won the gold medal in the Illumination Awards.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, make sure to get
I'd love to come back. I'd love to come back. Maybe toward Christmas we can talk about the Ornament Keeper.
Okay. So I am going to send you a date, and we will do it in December, because I've been looking and praying for a book to do at Christmas time.
There you go.
So look at that. We're all set. Okay.
All right.
All right, honey.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
so much. God bless everyone.